This is an ABC News special, The 92 Vote. Tonight, live from St. Louis, Missouri, the first presidential debate. Now reporting from the ABC News World Headquarters, Peter Jennings.
Good evening and welcome to our coverage of the first debate. That is the field house at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, where George Bush and Bill Clinton and Ross Perot, already on the stage, know they have their work cut out for them. And when it's over, we'll hear what some of the voters' impressions are before the so-called spin doctors get to them. And it wouldn't be a televised debate if we didn't have various ABC News colleagues in place ready with their opinions. We've never had a three-way presidential debate before, and the negotiations have included such mundane matters, mundane at least to most of us, as to whether the candidates can take notes on a certain kind of paper. That's Mrs. Perot, by the way. And whether when we first see them they were already going to be on stage or would walk into the applause of their supporters. That's the final outcome of their negotiation. The candidates have had reams of advice. The pundits have had a field day telling us all how important this debate is. The moderator is going to be Jim Lehrer from McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour on PBS, and he will introduce the rest of his panelists. Here we go to St. Louis. Have a good evening.
Good evening and welcome to the first of three debates among the major candidates for President of the United States, sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. The candidates are independent candidate Ross Perot, Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee, and President George Bush, the Republican nominee. I am Jim Lehrer of the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour on PBS. I will be the moderator for this 90-minute event, which is taking place before an audience here in the athletic complex on the campus of Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Three journalists will be asking questions tonight. They are John Mashik of the Boston Globe, Ann Compton of ABC News, and Sandra Van Oker, a freelance journalist. We will follow a format agreed to by representatives of the Clinton and Bush campaigns. That agreement contains no restrictions on the content or subject matter of the questions. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of those, as well as the questioning, was determined by a drawing. The first question goes to Mr. Perot. He will have 2 minutes to answer, to be followed by rebuttals of 1 minute each from Governor Clinton and then President Bush. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening, Jim.
The first topic tonight is what separates each of you from the other. Mr. Perot, what do you believe tonight is the single most important separating issue of this campaign?
I think the principal issue that separates me is that 5.5 million people came together on their own and put me on the ballot. I was not put on the ballot by either of the two parties. I was not put on the ballot by any PAC money, by any foreign lobbyist money, by any special interest money. This is a movement that came from the people. This is the way the framers of the Constitution intended our government to be, a government that comes from the people. Over time, we have developed a government that comes at the people, that comes from the top down, where the people are more or less treated as objects to be programmed during the campaign with commercials and media events and fear messages and personal attacks and things of that nature. The thing that separates my candidacy and makes it unique is that this came from millions of people in 50 states all over this country who wanted a candidate that worked and belonged to nobody but them. I go into this race as their servant, and I belong to them. So this comes from the people.
Governor Clinton, 1 minute response.
The most important distinction in this campaign is that I represent real hope for change, a departure from trickle-down economics, a departure from tax and spend economics to invest and grow. But before I can do that, I must challenge the American people to change, and they must decide. Tonight I say to the President, Mr. Bush, for 12 years you've had it your way, you've had your chance, and it didn't work. It's time to change. I want to bring that change to the American people, but we must all decide first we have the courage to change for hope and a better tomorrow.
President Bush, 1 minute response, sir.
Well, I think one thing that distinguishes is experience. I think we've dramatically changed the world. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but the changes are mind-boggling for world peace. Kids go to bed at night without the same fear of nuclear war. And change for change's sake isn't enough. We saw that message in the late 70s, and we heard a lot about change, and what happened? The misery index went right through the roof. But my economic program, I think, is the kind of change we want. And the way we're going to get it done is we're going to have a brand new Congress. A lot of them are thrown out because of all the scandals. I'll sit down with them, Democrats and Republicans alike, and work for my agenda for American renewal, which represents real change. But I'd say if you had to separate out, I think it's experience at this level.
Governor Clinton, how do you respond to the president on the question? You have 2 minutes on the question of experience. He says that is what distinguishes him from the other two of you.
I believe experience counts, but it's not everything. Values, judgment, and the record that I have amassed in my state also should count for something. I've worked hard to create good jobs and to educate people. My state now ranks first in the country in job growth this year, fourth in income growth, fourth in the reduction of poverty, third in overall economic performance, according to a major news magazine. That's because we believe in investing in education and in jobs. And we have to change in this country. You know, my wife Hillary gave me a book about a year ago in which the author defined insanity as just doing the same old thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We have got to have the courage to change. Experience is important, yes. I've gotten a lot of good experience in dealing with ordinary people over the last year and a month. I've touched more people's lives and seen more heartbreak and hope, more pain and more promise than anybody else who's run for president this year. And I think the American people deserve better than they're getting. We have gone from first to 13th in the world in wages in the last 12 years since Mr. Bush and Mr. Reagan have been in. Personal income has dropped while people have worked harder in the last 4 years. There have been twice as many bankruptcies as new jobs created. We need a new approach. The same old experience is not relevant. We're living in a new world after the Cold War, and what works in this new world is not trickle down, not government for the benefit of the privileged few, not tax and spend, but a commitment to invest in American jobs and American education, controlling American health care costs, and bringing the American people together. That is what works. And you can have the right kind of experience and the wrong kind of experience. Mine is rooted in the real lives of real people, and it will bring real results if we have the courage to change.
President Bush, 1 minute to respond.
I just thought of another big difference here between me. I don't believe Mr. Perot feels this way, but I know Governor Clinton did because I want to accurately quote him. I think he said that the country is coming apart at the seams. Now, I know that the only way he can win is to make everybody believe the economy is worse than it is. But this country's not coming apart at the seams, for heaven's sakes. We're the United States of America. In spite of the economic problems, we're the most respected economy around the world. Many would trade for it. We've been caught up in a global slowdown. We can do much, much better. But we ought not to try to convince the American people that America is a country that's coming apart at the seams. I would hate to be running for president and think that the only way I could win would be to convince everybody how horrible things are. Yes, there are big problems, and yes, people are hurting, but I believe that this agenda for American renewal that I have is the answer to do it, and I believe we can get it done now, whereas we didn't in the past, because you're going to have a whole brand new bunch of people in the Congress that are going to have to listen to the same American people I'm listening to.
Mr. Perot, a minute response, sir.
Well, they've got a point. I don't have any experience in running up a $4 trillion debt. I don't have any experience in gridlock government where nobody takes responsibility for anything and everybody blames everybody else. I don't have any experience in creating the worst public school system in the industrialized world, the most violent, crime-ridden society in the industrialized world, but I do have a lot of experience in getting things done. So if we're at a point in history where we want to stop talking about it and do it, I've got a lot of experience in figuring out how to solve problems, making the solutions work, and then moving on to the next one. I've got a lot of experience in figuring out how to solve problems, making the solutions work, and then moving on to the next one. I've got a lot of experience in not taking 10 years to solve a 10-minute problem. So if it's time for action, I think I have experience that counts. If there's more time for gridlock and talk and finger pointing, I'm the wrong man.
President Bush, the question goes to you. You have 2 minutes. And the question is this: are there important issues of character separating you from these other 2 men?
I think the American people should be the judge of that. I think character is a very important question. I said something the other day where I was accused of being like Joe McCarthy, because I questioned, I put it this way, I think it's wrong to demonstrate against your own country or organize demonstrations against your own country in foreign soil. I just think it's wrong. That maybe they say, well, it's a youthful indiscretion. I was 19 or 20 flying off an aircraft carrier, and that shaped me to be Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And I'm sorry, but demonstrating, it's not a question of patriotism, it's a question of character and judgment. They get on me, Bill's gotten on me about read my lips, and when I make a mistake, I'll admit it. But he has not admitted a mistake, and I just find it impossible to understand how an American can demonstrate against his own country in a foreign land, organizing demonstrations against it, when young men are held prisoner in Hanoi or kids out of the ghetto were drafted. Some say, well, you're a little old-fashioned. Maybe I am, but I just don't think that's right. Now, whether it's character or judgment, whatever it is, I have a big difference here on this issue. And so we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I couldn't do that. And I don't think most Americans could do that. And they all say, well, it was a long time ago. Well, let's admit it then. Say, I made a terrible mistake. How could you be Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and have some kids say, when you have to make a tough decision, as I did in Panama or in Kuwait, and then have some kid jump up and say, well, I'm not going to go. The Commander-in-Chief was organizing demonstrations halfway around the world during another era. So there are differences, but that's about the main area where I think we have a difference. I don't know about, we'll talk about that a little with Ross here in a bit.
Mr. Perot, you have 1 minute.
I think American people will make their own decisions on character. And at a time when we have work to do and we need action, I think they need to clearly understand the backgrounds of each person. I think the press can play a huge role in making sure that the backgrounds are clearly presented in an objective way. Then make a decision. Certainly anyone in the White House should have the character to be there. But I think it's very important to measure when and where things occurred. Did they occur when you were a young person in your formative years, or did they occur while you were a senior official in the federal government? When you're a senior official in the federal government spending billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, and you're a mature individual, and you make a mistake, then that was on our ticket. If you make it as a young man, time passes. So I would say just, look at all three of us, decide who you think will do the job, pick that person in November, because believe me, as I've said before, the party's over and it's time for the cleanup crew. And we do have to have change, and people who never take responsibility for anything when it happens on their watch, and people who are in charge.
Your time
is up.
Time is up.
More later.
More. Governor Clinton, you have 1 minute.
Ross gave a good answer, but I've got to respond directly to Mr. Bush. You have questioned my patriotism. You even brought some right-wing congressmen into the White House to plot how to attack me for going to Russia in 1969, 1970, when over 50,000 other Americans did. Now, I honor your service in World War II. I honor Mr. Perot's service in uniform and the service of every man and woman who ever served, including Admiral Crowell, who was your chairman of the Joint Chiefs and who's supporting me. But when Joe McCarthy went around this country attacking people's patriotism, he was wrong. He was wrong. And a senator from Connecticut stood up to him named Prescott Bush. Your father was right to stand up to Joe McCarthy. You were wrong to attack my patriotism. I was opposed to the war, but I love my country. And we need a president who will bring this country together, not divide it. We've had enough division. I want to lead a unified country.
All right, we move now to the subject of taxes and spending. The question goes to Governor Clinton for a 2-minute answer. It will be asked by Ann Compton.
Governor Clinton, can you lock in a level here tonight on where middle-income families can be guaranteed a tax cut, or at the very least, at what income level they can be guaranteed no tax increase?
The tax increase I have proposed triggers in at family incomes of $200,000 and above. Those are the people who in the 1980s had their incomes go up while their taxes went down. Middle-class people, defined as people with incomes of $52,000 and down, had their incomes go down while their taxes went up in the Reagan-Bush years because of 6 increases in the payroll taxes. So that is where my income limit would trigger.
So there will be no tax increases below
Right.
$200,000?
My plan, notwithstanding my opponent's ad, my plan triggers in at gross incomes, family incomes of $200,000 and above. Then we want to give modest middle-class tax relief to restore some fairness, especially to middle-class people with families with incomes of under $60,000. In addition to that, the money that I raise from upper-income people and from asking foreign corporations just to pay the same income on their income earned in America that American corporations do will be used to give incentives back to upper-income people. I want to give people permanent incentives, an investment tax credit like President Kennedy and the Congress inaugurated in the early 60s to get industry moving again, a research and development tax credit, a low-income housing tax credit, a long-term capital gains proposal for new business and business expansions. We've got to have no more trickle-down. We don't need across-the-board tax cuts for the wealthy for nothing. We need to say, here's your tax incentive if you create American jobs the old-fashioned way. I'd like to create more millionaires than were created under Mr. Bush and Mr. Reagan, but I don't want to have 4 years where we have no growth in the private sector, and that's what's happened in the last 4 years. We're down 35,000 jobs in the private sector. We need to invest and grow, and that's what I want to do.
President Bush, 1 minute, sir.
Well, I have to correct one thing. I didn't question the man's patriotism. I questioned his judgment and his character. What he did in Moscow, that's fine. Let him explain it. He did. I accept that. What I don't accept is demonstrating and organizing demonstrations in a foreign country when your country's at war. I'm sorry, I cannot accept that. In terms of this one on taxes, spells out the biggest difference between us. I do not believe we need to go back to the Mondale proposals or the Dukakis proposals of tax and spend. Governor Clinton says $200,000, but he also says he wants to raise $150 billion. Taxing people over $200,000 will not get you $150 billion. And then when you add in his other spending proposals, regrettably, you end up socking it to the working man. That old adage that they use, we're going to soak the rich. We're going to soak the rich. It always ends up being the poor cab driver or the working man that ends up paying the bill. And so I just have a different approach. I believe the way to get the deficit down is to control the growth of mandatory spending programs and not raise taxes on the American people. We got a big difference there.
Mr. Perot, 1 minute.
We've got to have a growing, expanding job base to give us a growing, expanded tax base. Right now, we have a flat to deteriorating job base, and where it appears to be growing, it's minimum wage jobs. So we've got to really rebuild our job base. That's going to take money for infrastructure investment to do that. Our foreign competitors are doing it. We're not. We cannot pay off the $4 trillion debt, balance the budget, and have the industries of the future and the high-paying jobs in this country without having the revenue. We're going to go through a period of shared sacrifice. There's one challenge. It's got to be fair. We've created a mess, don't have much to show for it, and we have got to fix it. And that's about all I can say in a minute.
Okay. Next question goes to President Bush for a 2-minute answer, and it will be asked by Sandy Van Oker.
Mr. President, this past week, your Secretary of the Army, Michael Stone, said he had no plans to abide by a congressional mandate to cut U.S. forces in Europe from 150 to 100,000 by the end of September 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. 1996. And with the total collapse of the Soviet Union, should American taxpayers be taxed to support armies in Europe when the European... Now, why, almost 50 years after the end of World War II, And with the total collapse of the Soviet Union, should American taxpayers be taxed to support armies in Europe when the Europeans have plenty of money to do it for themselves?
Well, Sandra, that's a good question. And the answer is, for 40-some years, we kept the peace. If you look at the cost of not keeping the peace in Europe, it would be exorbitant. We have reduced the number of troops that are deployed and going to be deployed. I have cut defense spending. And the reason we could do that is because of our fantastic success in winning the Cold War. We never would have got there if we'd gone for the nuclear freeze crowd. Never would have got there if we'd listened to those that wanted to cut defense spending. I think it is important that the United States stay in Europe and continue to guarantee the peace. We simply cannot pull back. Now, when anybody has a spending program they want to spend money on at home, they say, well, let's cut money out of the Defense Department. I will accept and have accepted the recommendations of two proven leaders, General Colin Powell and Secretary Dick Cheney. They feel that the levels we're operating at and the reductions that I have proposed are proper. And so I simply do not think we should go back to the isolation days and start blaming foreigners. We are the sole remaining superpower, and we should be that. And we have a certain disproportionate responsibility. But I would ask the American people to understand that if we make imprudent cuts, if we go too far, we risk the peace. And I don't want to do that. I've seen what it is like to see a war and to see the burdens of a war, and I don't want to see us make reckless cuts. Because of our programs, we have been able to significantly cut defense spending. But let's not cut into the muscle, and let's not cut down our insurance policy, which is participation of American forces in NATO, the greatest peacekeeping organization ever made. Today, you got problems in Europe, still bubbling along, even though Europe's going democracy's route. But we are there, and I think this insurance policy is necessary. I think it goes with world leadership, and I think the levels we've come up with are just about right.
Mr. Perot, 1 minute, sir.
If I'm poor and you're rich, and I can get you to defend me, that's good. But when the tables get turned, I ought to do my share. Right now, we spend about $300 billion a year on defense. The Japanese spend around $30 billion in Asia. The Germans spend around $30 billion in Europe. For example, Germany will spend $1 trillion building infrastructure over the next 10 years. It's kind of easy to do if you only have to pick up a $30 billion tab to defend your country. The European community is in a position to pay a lot more than they have in the past. I agree with the President. When they couldn't, we should have. Now that they can, they should. We sort of seem to have a desire to try to stay over there and control it. They don't want us to control it, very candidly. So I think, is very important for us to let them assume more and more of the burden, and for us to bring that money back here and rebuild our infrastructure, because we can only be a superpower if we are an economic superpower, and we can only be an economic superpower if we have a growing, expanding job base.
Governor Clinton. 1 minute, sir.
I agree with the general statement Mr. Bush made. I disagree that we need 150,000 troops to fulfill our role in Europe. We certainly must maintain an engagement there. There are certainly dangers there. There are certainly other trouble spots in the world which are closer to Europe than to the United States. But two former defense secretaries recently issued a report saying that 100,000 or slightly fewer troops would be enough, including President Reagan's former defense secretary, Mr. Carlucci. Many of the military experts whom I consulted on this agreed. We're going to have to spend more money in the future on military technology and on greater mobility, greater airlift, greater sea lift, the V-22 airplane. We're going to have to do some things that are quite costly, and I simply don't believe we can afford, nor do we need, to keep 150,000 troops in Europe, given how much the Red Army, now under the control of Russia, has been cut. The arms control agreement concluded between Mr. Bush and Mr. Yeltsin, something I have applauded. I don't think we need 150,000 troops. Let me make one other point. Mr. Bush talked about taxes. He didn't tell you that he vetoed a middle-class tax cut because it would be paid for by raising taxes on the wealthy, and vetoed an investment tax credit paid for by raising taxes on the wealthy.
All right, we go now to Mr. Perot for a 2-minute question, and it will be asked by John Mashik.
Mr. Perot, you talked about fairness just a minute ago on sharing the pain. As part of your plan to reduce the ballooning federal deficit, you've suggested that we raise gasoline taxes 50 cents a gallon over 5 years. Why punish the middle-class consumer to such a degree?
It's 10 cents a year cumulative. It finally gets to 50 cents at the end of the 5th year. I think punish is the wrong word. Again, see, I didn't create this problem. We're trying to solve it. Now, if you study our international competitors, some of our international competitors collect up to $3.50 a gallon in taxes, and they use that money to build infrastructure and create jobs. We collect 35 cents, and we don't have it to spend. I know it's not popular, and I understand the nature of your question, but the people who will be helped the most by it are the working people who will get the jobs created because of this tax. Why do we have to do it? Because we have so mismanaged our country over the years, and it is now time to pay the fiddler, and if we don't, we will be spending our children's money. We have spent $4 trillion worth. An incredible number of young people are active in supporting my effort because they're deeply concerned that we have taken the American dream from them. I think it's fitting that we're on the campus of a university tonight. These young people, when they get out of this wonderful university, will have difficulty finding a job. We've got to clean this mess up, leave this country in good shape, and pass on the American dream to them. We've got to collect the taxes to do it. If there's a fairer way, I'm all ears. But, see, let me make it very clear. If people don't have the stomach to fix these problems, I think it's a good time to face it in November. If they do, then they will have heard the harsh reality of what we have to do. I'm not playing Lawrence Welk music tonight.
All right, Governor Clinton, you have a minute, sir.
I think Mr. Perot has confronted this deficit issue, but I think it's important to point out that we really have two deficits in America, not one. We have a budget deficit in the federal government, but we also have an investment, a jobs, an income deficit. People are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago, 2/3 of our people. A $1,600 drop in average income in just the last 2 years. The problem I have with the Perot prescription is that almost all economists who've looked at it say that if you cut the deficit this much, this quick, it will increase unemployment, it will slow down the economy. That's why I think we shouldn't do it that quickly. We have a disciplined reduction in the deficit of 50% over the next 4 years, but first, get incentives to invest in this economy, put the American people back to work. We've got to invest and grow. 9 Nobel Prize-winning economists and 500 others, including numerous Republican and Democratic business executives, have endorsed this approach because it offers the best hope to put America back to work and get our incomes rising instead of falling.
President Bush, 1 minute, sir.
The question was on fairness. I just disagree with Mr. Perot. I don't believe it is fair to slap a 50-cent a gallon tax over whatever many years on the people that have to drive for a living, people that go long distances. I don't think we need to do it. You see, I have a fundamental difference. I agree with what he's talking about in trying to get the spending down and the discipline, although I think we ought to totally exempt Social Security. But he's talking tough medicine, and I think that's good. I disagree with the tax and spend philosophy. You see, I don't think we need to tax more and spend more and then say that's going to make the problem better, and I'm afraid that's what I think I'm hearing from Governor Clinton. I believe what you need to do is some of what Ross is talking about, control the growth of mandatory spending and get taxes down. He's mentioned some ways to do it, and I agree with those. I've been talking about getting a capital gains cut forever, and his friends in Congress have been telling me that's a tax break for the rich. It would stimulate investment. I'm for an investment tax allowance. I am for a first-time a tax break for first-time home buyers, and with this new Congress coming in, gridlock will be gone, and I'll sit down with them and say, let's get this done. But I do not want to go the tax and spend route.
All right, let's move on now to the subject of jobs. The first question goes to President Bush for 2 minutes, and John will ask that question. John?
Mr. President, last month you came to St. Louis to announce a very lucrative contract for McDonnell Douglas to build F-15s for Saudi Arabia. In today's Post-Dispatch, a retired saleswoman, a 75-year-old woman named Marjorie Roberts, asked if she could ask a question of the candidate, said she wanted to register. Mr. President, last month you came to St. Louis to announce a very lucrative contract for McDonnell Douglas to build F-15s for Saudi Arabia. In today's Post-Dispatch, a retired saleswoman, a 75-year-old woman named Marjorie Roberts, asked if she could ask a question of the candidate, said she wanted to register her concern about the lack of a plan to convert our defense-oriented industries into other purposes. How would you answer her?
Well, I assume she was supportive of the decision on McDonnell Douglas. I assume she was supporting me on the decision to sell those airplanes. I think it's a good decision. Took a little heat for it, but I think it was the correct decision to do, and we worked it out. And indeed, we're moving forward all around the world in a much more peaceful way. So that one we came away with, which in creating jobs for the American people. I would simply say to her, look, take a look at what the president has proposed on job retraining. When you cut back on defense spending, some people are going to be thrown out of work. If you throw another 50,000 kids on the street because of cutting recklessly in troop levels, you're going to put a lot more out on work. I would say to them, look at the job retraining programs that we're proposing. Therein is the best answer to her. And another one is stimulate investment in savings. I mean, we've got big economic problems, but we are not coming apart at the seams. We're ready for a recovery with interest rates down and inflation down, the cruelest tax of all, caught up in a global slowdown right now, but that will change if you go with the programs I've talked about and if you help with job retraining and education. I am a firm believer that our America 2000 education problem is the answer. A little longer run, it's going to take a while to educate, but it is a good program. So her best hope for short term is job retraining if she was thrown out of work at a defense plant. But tell her it's not all that gloomy. We're the United States. We faced tough problems before. Look at the misery index when